Welcome, dear listener, to Marple Whispers. I'm Sean, and together we'll search for truth where others see only tea and roses. But beware, behind the lace curtains lurks betrayal, and behind every clue, a killer waits. A cozy English village dinner party turning deadly. Succulent roast quail stuffed with fresh herbs from the host's garden. But one bite sends a stern guardian clutching her throat, gasping for air, while a wide-eyed child collapses in agony. Is it a tragic accident or cold-blooded murder? Enter the unassuming Miss Jane Marple, knitting secrets together like a master detective. As whispers of poison spread through St. Mary Mead, she uncovers a web of greed and betrayal. The charming host, Sir Ambrose, harbours a dark motive: to seize control of his ward's fortunes by eliminating the one woman standing in his way. With sharp observations, a child's testimony, and a hidden vial of deadly extract, Miss Marple unravels the truth. A calculated herb swap, a fatal feast, and a killer's confession. But will justice prevail before another victim falls? Dive into the herb of death, a tale of deception where every leaf hides a lethal secret. You won't look away. Chapter 1. The Invitation to Clodderham Court, in the tranquil heart of St. Mary Mead, where the lanes wound lazily between thatched cottages and the air carried the faint scent of blooming honeysuckle. Miss Jane Marple occupied her customary spot by the window of her modest sitting-room. Her fingers moved with the rhythmic precision of long habit, guiding fine wool through the needles to form a delicate pattern. A christening shawl for her great niece, whose arrival was imminent. The village outside hummed with the ordinary cadence of life, the distant clip-clop of a horse-drawn cart, the chatter of sparrows in the eaves, and the occasional peal of laughter from children at play. It was a scene of such unvarying peace that one might almost forget the undercurrents of human nature that swirled beneath, like hidden eddies in a placid stream. Yet Miss Marple, with her bird-like eyes sharp behind steel-rimmed spectacles, never forgot. She had seen too much in her long years, small jealousies blooming into scandals, whispered secrets unravelling into tragedies. As she knitted, her mind wandered to the peculiarities of her neighbours, piecing together fragments of gossip like a mosaic. It was in this reflective mood that the postman's knock disrupted the afternoon serenity. The letter, when she opened it, was penned on heavy cream stationery, embossed with a heraldic crest that spoke of faded grandeur. It came from Sir Ambrose Bercy of Clodderham Court, a man whose return from the colonies had stirred the village like a spice from his own storied gardens. "My dear Miss Marple," it read in a bold, flourishing hand, "I should be most honoured if you would join a select company for dinner this evening at 8. Nothing formal, just good food, lively talk, and perhaps a glimpse of my latest botanical triumphs. Yours sincerely, Ambrose Bercy." She set the letter down, a faint smile playing at her lips. Sir Ambrose was not one for casual invitations. His gatherings, though infrequent, were always laced with purpose. He had amassed a fortune in India, trading in teas and silks, but it was his passion for exotic flora that truly defined him now. Whispers in the village spoke of his greenhouse, a veritable jungle of rare specimens, some benign, others whispered to harbour deadly secrets. And then there were his wards, young Geoffrey Denman, his nephew by marriage, and the lovely Sylvia Keene, whose fortunes he oversaw with a guardian's zeal, though some said it bordered on possessiveness. Miss Marple considered declining. Her evenings were precious for quiet contemplation. But curiosity, that eternal spark, won out. Besides, she had heard rumours of tensions at the court, disagreements over inheritances, budding romances thwarted by stern overseers. It would be instructive, she decided, to observe the players firsthand. With a nod to herself, she penned a brief acceptance and dispatched it via the afternoon post. As dusk settled like a soft veil over the countryside, Miss Marple made her way to Clotterham Court in a hired trap, the wheels crunching over gravel lanes lined with ancient oaks. The estate rose before her, a rambling Tudor pile, with mullioned windows glowing warmly against the gathering shadows. Ivy clung to its stone facade like possessive fingers, and the air was redolent with the earthy tang of turned soil from the expansive gardens beyond. Sir Ambrose himself greeted her at the door, his portly frame clad in a tweed jacket that strained at the buttons, his walrus moustache bristling with enthusiasm. "Miss Marple? A delight, an absolute delight. Come in, let me take a rap." His voice boomed with the authority of one accustomed to command, yet there was a gleam in his eye that suggested hidden amusements. Behind him hovered Geoffrey, a tall, awkward youth with tousled hair and a collar that seemed perpetually askew, his gaze flickering with the unease of someone harbouring unspoken thoughts. The drawing-room was a treasure trove of imperial relics. Carved ivory elephants on the mantel, faded maps of the Raj pinned to the walls, and a tiger-skin rug that glared up with glass eyes. Other guests had already assembled. There was Dr. Owen Lloyd, the village physician, a lean man with a thoughtful brow and a habit of stroking his chin during pauses in conversation. Beside him stood the Reverend Mr. Petherick, the vicar, whose round face beamed benevolence, though his sermons could sting with moral fervour. Sylvia Keene, ethereal in a gown of pale lavender, perched on a settee, her dark curls framing a face of delicate beauty. She smiled shyly at Miss Marple, but her eyes held a spark of quiet rebellion. And then there was Mrs. Eleanor Pritchard, Sylvia's guardian, a woman of formidable presence, with steel-grey hair pulled into a severe bun and a mouth set in perpetual disapproval. She nodded curtly at the newcomer, her voice slicing the air like a knife through silk. "Miss Marple, is it? I've heard of your observations. Do join us." Her grip on Sylvia's arm was firm, almost proprietary, as if the girl were a valuable artifact not to be mishandled. Sir Ambrose, ever the genial host, poured sherry from a crystal decanter, his stories flowing as freely as the amber liquid. The jungles of Bengal, full of wonders and perils. Take digitalis, for instance, from the humble foxglove. A lifesaver in small doses, a silent killer in large. I've a fine specimen in my herbarium. Reminds me of a treacherous guide I once had. His laughter rumbled, but Miss Marple noted how Geoffrey's hand tightened on his glass, and how Mrs. Pritchard's lips thinned in distaste. As the group settled into easy chatter, the doctor on recent ailments, the vicar on parish fundraisers, Miss Marple listened, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap, like a metronome measuring hidden rhythms. Sylvia spoke animatedly of her longing for adventure, her words painting dreams of far-off lands, while Geoffrey stole glances at her, his admiration plain. Mrs. Pritchard interjected sharply, steering the talk to prudent investments and the follies of youth. Sir Ambrose watched it all with a paternal air, but there was something calculating in his gaze, as if he were a chess master surveying the board. The butler announced dinner, and as they rose, a faint chill seemed to brush the room, though the fire crackled merrily. Miss Marple, trailing behind, pondered the undercurrents she sensed, the subtle frictions, the unspoken alliances. Little did she know, as they filed into the dining room, that the evening's menu would serve up more than mere sustenance. Chapter 2. The Fatal Feast. The transition from the drawing-room to the dining hall at Clodderham Court was like stepping into a different era, one where the opulence of empire lingered in every polished surface and gilded edge. The room stretched long and narrow, its walls panelled in dark oak that absorbed the light from a massive chandelier overhead, casting a warm, amber glow over the proceedings. Heavy damask curtains framed tall windows that looked out onto the moonlit gardens, where shadows danced among the neatly trimmed hedges, and the faint outline of Sir Ambrose's prized greenhouse loomed like a glass sentinel. The air was thick with the mingled aromas of roasted meats, fresh bread, and something sharper, herbal, almost medicinal, that teased the senses without quite revealing its source. At the head of the table, Sir Ambrose presided like a benevolent monarch, his chair a throne of carved mahogany. He gestured expansively as the guests filed in, his voice booming with that peculiar blend of hospitality and command honed from years in distant outposts. "Come, come, my friends. Take your seats. I've arranged it all for comfort and conversation. Miss Marple, if you'll sit here to my right, your keen eye will appreciate the view of the herb beds outside. Dr. Lloyd, opposite her, we must discuss that fascinating case of tropical fever you mentioned earlier. Vicar, beside the doctor, and young Geoffrey next to you. Sylvia, my dear, across from Geoffrey, Mrs. Pritchard. You'll be at my left, the place of honour." Miss Marple settled into her assigned spot with a polite nod, her small frame sinking into the plush cushion. She noted the precision of the seating. Sir Ambrose at the helm, able to survey all, Geoffrey and Sylvia facing each other, their eyes meeting briefly in a way that spoke volumes of youthful longing. Mrs. Pritchard close enough to the host for pointed discourse, yet separated from her ward by the expanse of linen and silver. And then there was little Dolly, the vicar's niece, a last-minute addition who'd arrived with wide eyes and a ribbon in her hair, insisting on joining the grown-up party. The vicar had apologized profusely, but Sir Ambrose waved it off with a chuckle. "Nonsense, Petherick. The more the merrier. We'll find a spot for the sprite. Here, at the foot of the table, with a cushion to boost her up." The table itself was a masterpiece of Edwardian excess. Starched white cloth draped to the floor, centered with a low arrangement of fresh flowers. Roses and lilies interspersed with sprigs of green that Miss Marple recognized as sage and thyme from the garden. Cutlery gleamed in regimented rows, crystal glasses sparkled, and at each place setting sat a name card in elegant script, as if this were a diplomatic summit rather than a village supper. Footmen, retained from Sir Ambrose's colonial staff, moved with silent efficiency, pouring water and unfolding napkins. As they all took their places, the conversation resumed its earlier ebb and flow, laced now with the anticipation of the meal. Sir Ambrose rang a small silver bell, and the first course appeared. A delicate consommé, clear as amber, garnished with tiny croutons. "From my own recipe," he declared, lifting his spoon. "A touch of sherry for depth. Reminds me of evenings in Calcutta. where the heat made every flavour sing. Dr. Lloyd leaned forward, his professional curiosity piqued. "Speaking of flavours, Sir Ambrose, I've been meaning to ask about your herb collection. You mentioned digitalis earlier. Foxglove, isn't it? Remarkable plant. In medicine, it's a godsend for heart conditions, but one must be precise with dosages." Sir Ambrose's moustache twitched in amusement. "Ah yes, the foxglove. A beauty and a beast. In my greenhouse, it thrives alongside safer cousins like sage and rosemary. Picked fresh this morning for tonight's stuffing. You'll taste the difference. None of that dried nonsense from the shops." He glanced at Geoffrey, who was fiddling with his napkin. "Geoffrey helped me gather them, didn't you, lad? Good for building character, eh?" Geoffrey nodded, his cheeks flushing slightly under the scrutiny. "Yes, uncle. The sage was particularly lush this year." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught the brief hesitation, the way his eyes darted to Sylvia before returning to his soup. Sylvia, for her part, sipped delicately, her gaze soft and appreciative as she looked across at him. "It sounds wonderful, Sir Ambrose. I've always admired your garden. It's like a little piece of paradise." Mrs. Pritchard, however, was less effusive. She set her spoon down with a faint clink, her expression one of measured scepticism. "Herbs are all well and good, but one must be cautious with experiments. In my experience, sticking to tradition avoids mishaps. Sylvia, dear, don't slurp. Mind your posture." Her tone was that of a schoolmistress, corrective yet laced with an undercurrent of possession. Sylvia straightened imperceptibly, her smile fading just a touch. The vicar, ever the peacemaker, interjected with a genial laugh. Now, Mrs. Pritchard, let's not dampen the spirits. Sir Ambrose's feasts are legendary. Remember last year's harvest supper? That venison pie was divine." Little Dolly, perched on her cushion, giggled at the word divine, her small feet swinging under the table. "Uncle says divine things come from heaven, but pie comes from the kitchen." The adults chuckled, the moment lightening the air. As the soup plates were cleared, the main course arrived with flourish. Roast quail, golden and crisp, arranged on platters with mounds of stuffing that exuded a savoury steam. Vegetables, carrots glazed in butter, peas bright as emeralds, accompanied them, along with a rich gravy boat and baskets of warm rolls. But it was the stuffing that drew the eye, flecked with green herbs, moist and aromatic, piled generously beside each bird. Sir Ambrose rose slightly, carving knife in hand, his face alight with pride. "Behold the pièce de résistance, quail stuffed with my special sage mixture, harvested at dawn, chopped fine, and blended with breadcrumbs, onions, and a secret spice from the east. Freshness is key. It elevates the ordinary to the extraordinary." He served with deliberate care, portioning out the birds and heaping stuffing onto plates. To Mrs. Pritchard, he added an extra spoonful. "For you, madam, a generous helping. Your discerning palate will appreciate it." She accepted with a nod, though her fork prodded it suspiciously. Miss Marple watched the proceedings closely, her own plate receiving a modest serving. The scent was indeed intoxicating, earthy, with a hint of bitterness that lingered on the tongue. She took a small bite, savouring it. "Delightful, Sir Ambrose." The herbs are so vivid, one can almost taste the garden soil. Her compliment was genuine, but her mind noted details. The way Sir Ambrose's hand steadied as he served Geoffrey and Sylvia, the slight pause before doling out to the doctor and vicar. Conversation blossomed anew as forks clinked against china. Dr. Lloyd expounded on the virtues of herbal remedies. In my practice, I've seen foxglove save lives. Digitalis extract regulates the heart like nothing else. But mishandled, it's perilous. A leaf or two in the wrong brew. He trailed off, shaking his head. Sir Ambrose laughed heartily. Fear not, doctor. My garden is meticulously labelled. Sage here, foxglove there, worlds apart. No room for error in my domain. Yet Miss Marple observed Geoffrey's sudden interest in his water-glass, avoiding his uncle's gaze. Sylvia, meanwhile, chatted animatedly with the vicar about church flower arrangements, her laughter like tinkling bells. I'd love to help with the altar displays, perhaps some of Sir Ambrose's blooms. Mrs. Pritchard cut in sharply. Sylvia, your time is better spent on studies. Frivolities like flowers lead to distractions. Her eyes flicked meaningfully toward Geoffrey, who busied himself with his quail. The tension was subtle, like a thread pulled taut, but Miss Marple felt it keenly. She recalled similar dynamics in the village. A stern aunt, a rebellious niece, whispers of controlled fortunes. Inheritances, she knew, could poison relationships as surely as any plant. Little Dolly, undeterred by adult undercurrents, attacked her plate with gusto, her small portion of stuffing disappearing quickly. This is yummy! Tastes like magic. The vicar patted her head affectionately. Moderation, Dolly. Save room for pudding. As the meal progressed, the talk turned to local matters. The upcoming fete, a disputed boundary in the churchyard, the doctor's recent house calls. Sir Ambrose steered it toward his travels, regaling them with tales of Indian bazaars where spices could cure or kill. Once, a Raja offered me a potion said to grant eternal youth. Turned out to be laced with arsenic. Ha! His mirth filled the room. But Miss Marple noted Mrs. Pritchard's growing discomfort. She shifted in her seat, her face paling slightly as she pushed at her stuffing. The dessert course was imminent, a trifle layered with cream and fruit, when the first sign of trouble emerged. Mrs. Pritchard set her fork down abruptly, a hand rising to her throat. This stuffing. It has an odd bitterness, almost metallic. Her voice was strained, lacking its usual edge. Heads turned, concern etching faces. Sir Ambrose frowned, sampling a bit from his own plate. Nonsense, madam. Mine tastes fine. Perhaps a touch too much seasoning for your liking. But Mrs. Pritchard's colour drained further, her breathing quickening to shallow gasps. No, something's wrong. My heart, it's racing. Dr. Lloyd was on his feet in an instant, his chair scraping back. Let me see. Pulse irregular. Good heavens, symptoms of cardiac distress. He loosened her collar, calling for water. The room erupted into murmurs, the footman hovering uncertainly. Then little Dolly whimpered, clutching her stomach. Uncle, I feel funny. Tummy hurts. Her face twisted in pain, and she retched slightly, a small amount of food spilling onto her napkin. The vicar scooped her up, alarm in his eyes. Dolly! What's this? Chaos descended like a sudden storm. Sir Ambrose bellowed for salts and brandy. Geoffrey leapt to fetch a basin. Sylvia's hands flew to her mouth in horror. Miss Marple remained seated, her eyes darting, noting who had eaten how much stuffer, whose plates were cleared, the untouched portions on Sir Ambrose's and Geoffrey's dishes. Dr. Lloyd worked frantically, first on Mrs. Pritchard, whose convulsions grew violent, her lips turning blue. Digitalis poisoning! I'd stake my life on it! Foxglove! But how? Mrs. Pritchard's eyes bulged in accusation, fixing on Sir Ambrose. The herbs! A final gasp, and she slumped forward, lifeless, her head thudding against the tablecloth. The crystal rattled, a glass tipped, spilling wine like blood. Dolly, mercifully, fared better, her smaller dose inducing vomiting that expelled much of the toxin. Dr. Lloyd administered an emetic, and she heaved wretchedly into the basin, tears streaming. "It burns," she sobbed, clinging to her uncle. The room fell into stunned silence, broken only by Sylvia's soft weeping and Geoffrey's muttered oaths. Sir Ambrose stood frozen, his face a mask of shock. "An accident, it must be. The garden, perhaps a mislabelling. I picked them myself." Miss Marple's mind raced, piecing fragments. The boastful serving, the extra helping for Mrs. Pritchard, Dolly's incidental portion. Accidents, in her experience, were seldom so selective. She glanced at the window, where the greenhouse squatted in the darkness, harbouring secrets amid its leaves. The evening's feast had turned fatal, and beneath the veneer of civility she sensed the deliberate hand of malice. The doctor straightened, his expression grave. "We must summon the authorities. This is no natural death." As the footman rushed out to telephone, the guests exchanged uneasy glances, the air heavy with unspoken suspicions. Geoffrey comforted Sylvia, his arm around her shoulders, a gesture Mrs. Pritchard would have forbidden. The vicar murmured prayers over Dolly, now pale but stable on a chaise. Sir Ambrose sank into his chair, mopping his brow. Unthinkable! My own herbs! But Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the flicker in his eyes, not grief, but calculation. The night had only begun to unravel its threads, and she, with her quiet vigilance, would tug at them until the pattern emerged. In the ensuing hours, as Inspector Slack arrived with his notebook and brusque manner, the dining room transformed into an interrogation chamber. Statements were taken amid the debris of the meal, the congealed stuffing a grim reminder. "Poison in the sage," the inspector grunted, bagging samples. "Deliberate or not, we'll see." Miss Marple offered her observations sparingly, knowing the police often dismissed old maids. Yet she pondered the motives. Mrs. Pritchard's control over Sylvia's fortune, Sir Ambrose's strained finances, Geoffrey's thwarted affections. The child's survival pointed to targeted dosing. Dolly, an unintended victim, her small helping a mere trace. As the body was removed under a sheet, the guests dispersed into the chill night, carriages crunching gravel. Miss Marple accepted a ride from the vicar, Dolly asleep in his arms. "A dreadful business," he sighed. "Who could have foreseen?" "Indeed," she replied softly, her mind alight with possibilities. In St. Mary Mead, evil wore familiar faces, and this feast had served it up with chilling precision. Chapter 3. Shadows of Suspicion. The morning after the calamity at Clotterham Court dawned grey and heavy. The sky over St. Mary Mead cloaked in a shroud of low clouds that mirrored the village's mood. The news of Mrs. Pritchard's death spread like wildfire through the lanes, carried by hurried whispers at the bakery, the butcher's, and the post office counter. By the time the church bells tolled for the morning service, the tragedy had taken on the weight of legend, a grim tale of poisoned herbs and a child's narrow escape. In her modest cottage, Miss Jane Marple sat by the fire, her knitting idle in her lap, her mind weaving through the events of the previous night, like a shuttle through a loom. The invitation, the dinner, the sudden horror, all of it felt like the opening act of a drama, with the true players yet to reveal their roles. Clodderham Court, now cordoned by constables, stood silent under the drizzle, its windows dark as if mourning its own disgrace. Inspector Slack, a man whose brusque efficiency bordered on impatience, had taken charge with his usual vigour, his notebook filling with statements and his suspicions darting like hounds after a scent. The dining room, once resplendent, was now a crime scene, its tables stripped of finery, the remnants of the fatal stuffing sealed in jars for analysis at the county laboratory. Dr. Lloyd, summoned again at dawn, confirmed the cause. Digitalis poisoning, derived from foxglove leaves, mistaken or not, for sage in the quail's stuffing. The child Dolly had survived due to her smaller portion, her body expelling the toxin through violent sickness. Mrs. Pritchard had not been so fortunate. Miss Marple, sipping tea in her parlour, turned the facts over like pebbles in a stream. The poison was no accident, of that she was certain. Sir Ambrose's greenhouse, with its meticulously labelled plants, ruled out careless error. The selective sickness, Mrs. Pritchard dead, Dolly ill, others untouched, pointed to intent, a hand guiding the lethal dose. But whose, and why? She recalled a long-ago incident in the village when a grocer's wife laced a rival's tea with belladonna, driven by jealousy over a shared suitor. Motives, Miss Marple knew, hid in the mundane: greed, love, fear, or power. Here the threads seemed tangled around money and control. Her musings were interrupted by a knock at the door. It was Florence, her maid, bearing a note from the vicar, Mr. Petherick, requesting a visit. "Poor Dolly's shaken, miss, but recovering," Florence relayed, her eyes wide with the village's collective shock. "They're saying it's murder, plain as day." Miss Marple nodded, slipping on her coat. The vicarage would offer more than tea. It would provide glimpses into the undercurrents of the previous night. The vicarage, a cosy stone house beside the church, smelled of beeswax and lavender. Its parlour cluttered with hymnals and framed samplers. Mr. Petherick greeted her warmly, though his face bore the strain of sleepless hours. Dolly, curled on a sofa with a blanket, looked pale but alert, her eyes bright with the resilience of youth. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," the vicar said, pouring tea. "This dreadful business, it's shaken us all." "Dolly's much better, but the memory of last night." He shuddered, glancing at his niece. Dolly, clutching a cup of milk, spoke up unprompted. "The stuffing tasted funny, Miss Marple." "Bitter, like when I took medicine for a cold." Sir Ambrose gave Mrs. Pritchard lots of it, kept saying she should try more. Her small voice was matter-of-fact, but the words landed like stones. Miss Marple leant forward, her expression gentle but keen. "Did he now? And did anyone else get extra, Dolly?" The child frowned, thinking, "Not really. He served me a little bit, said it was special for grown-ups, but I could have some. Geoffrey didn't eat much of his." He pushed it around his plate. She mimicked the action with her spoon, earning a soft chuckle from the vicar, though his eyes remained troubled. Miss Marple filed this away. Children, unburdened by adult pretense, saw what others missed. Dolly's observation of Sir Ambrose's insistence on Mrs. Pritchard's portion, and Geoffrey's reluctance, added texture to the pattern. "You're a sharp girl, Dolly," she said, patting her hand. "Rest now. You've been very brave." As they sipped tea, the vicar confided further. "I overheard something at the dinner, Miss Marple, before the tragedy. Mrs. Pritchard and Sir Ambrose had words earlier in the week at the parish hall. Something about Sylvia's inheritance and Geoffrey's prospects. Mrs. Pritchard was adamant they shouldn't marry, called it imprudent. Sir Ambrose, though, seemed keen to unite them, said it would secure their futures under his guidance. Miss Marple's eyes narrowed slightly. Guidance or control? She murmured. Almost to herself, the vicar blinked, unaccustomed to such pointed queries from the mild-mannered spinster. Well, I suppose. Sir Ambrose does manage their affairs. Geoffrey's trust, Sylvia's fortune, they are under his stewardship until they come of age. And Mrs. Pritchard, Miss Marple prompted. She was Sylvia's legal guardian, appointed by the girl's late parents. Quite protective. Some might say domineering. She questioned Sir Ambrose's handling of the funds, hinted at an audit. I thought it just talk, but now... He trailed off, his face clouding. The conversation was cut short by the arrival of Inspector Slack, who strode in with the air of a man impatient for answers. Miss Marple, he acknowledged curtly, then turned to the vicar. Need to ask the child a few questions. Routine, you understand. His tone suggested routine was the last thing on his mind. Dolly repeated her story, her small voice steady despite the inspector's brusque manner. Slack jotted notes, his pencil scratching like an accusation. So, the host served the stuffing himself. Interesting. And you, Miss Marple, saw anything peculiar? She smiled faintly, her demeanour serene. Only what one expects at a dinner party, Inspector. People talking, eating, watching one another. But I did notice Sir Ambrose was most attentive to Mrs. Pritchard's plate. She left it at that, knowing better than to overstep with a man like Slack, who bristled at amateur interference. He grunted, dismissing her as he turned to the vicar. We're analysing the food. Early tests confirm foxglove in the stuffing. Lethal dose for the woman, trace for the girl. Someone knew what they were doing. He snapped his notebook shut and departed, leaving a chill in his wake. Miss Marple walked home slowly, her umbrella shielding her from the drizzle. The village was abuzz, knots of gossipers lingering under shop awnings. At the post office, she overheard Mrs. Wimpole, the postmistress, holding court. Mark my words, it's that Geoffrey Denman. Always skulking about, mooning over Miss Sylvia. Mrs. Pritchard wouldn't hear of it, stood in his way. And now she's gone. The listeners clucked in agreement, their eyes darting toward Clotterham Court. Miss Marple paused, pretending to adjust her scarf. Gossip, while unreliable, often held kernels of truth. Geoffrey's affection for Sylvia was no secret, nor was Mrs. Pritchard's opposition. But was the boy capable of such a calculated act? She recalled his flushed cheeks, his nervous glances at dinner. Passion could drive rash deeds, but poison required patience. Her next stop was Dr. Lloyd's surgery, a tidy office smelling of antiseptic and old books. The doctor, still shaken from his role in the night's events, welcomed her warmly. Miss Marple, I'm glad you've come. This business, it's monstrous. Digitalis of all things. I've used it in minute doses for patients, but this was deliberate, no question. She nodded, settling into a chair. The child's recovery intrigues me, Doctor. Why did Dolly survive when Mrs. Pritchard did not? He rubbed his chin, thoughtful. Quantity, I'd wager. Dolly had a child's portion, perhaps a teaspoon of stuffing. Mrs. Pritchard's plate was piled high. I saw Sir Ambrose serve her twice. The poison wasn't evenly mixed either. My own portion was clean, as was the vicar's. It's as if the lethal dose was targeted, Miss Marple echoed softly. And the kitchen? Could the mistake have happened there? Doubtful? I spoke to the cook, Mrs. Huggins, a sensible woman. She swears the herbs came straight from Sir Ambrose's hands. He brought them in himself, chopped and ready. No one else touched the stuffing. This was significant. Miss Marple's mind flickered to a case years ago in St. Mary Mead, where a baker's apprentice slipped arsenic into a rival's loaf. The key had been opportunity and control over the ingredients. Sir Ambrose's greenhouse was his sanctum, his herbs his tools. But why risk a child's life? Unless Dolly's illness was a miscalculation, a smokescreen to suggest accident. As she left the surgery, she encountered Sylvia Keene, walking alone toward the village green, her face pale under a wide-brimmed hat. "Miss Marple!" the girl exclaimed, her voice trembling. "I can't believe it. Mrs. Pritchard gone? And poor Dolly. It's all so horrible." Miss Marple patted her arm, noting the red-rimmed eyes. "A shock, my dear. Were you close to your guardian?" Sylvia hesitated, twisting a handkerchief. She was strict, always watching my accounts, my letters. She said it was for my own good, but sometimes I felt like a prisoner. Sir Ambrose was kinder. He spoke of my future, of marrying Geoffrey one day. But now, her voice broke, and she looked away. "And Geoffrey?" Miss Marple asked gently. "How does he bear it? He's quiet, more than usual. He blames himself, I think, for helping with the herbs. But he'd never hurt anyone. He's too gentle." Her defence was fervent, but a shadow crossed her face, as if doubt lingered. Miss Marple let her go, her mind turning to Geoffrey. The boy was an enigma, devoted to Sylvia, yet under Sir Ambrose's thumb. His role in gathering the herbs placed him near the crime, but his demeanour suggested fear, not cunning. She resolved to speak with him, but first she needed to see the greenhouse. Clodderham Court was quiet when she arrived. The constable's gone, replaced by a single officer at the gate. Sir Ambrose received her in the library, his joviality replaced by a haggard air. "Miss Marple, you're kind to call. This tragedy, it's undone me. My herbs, my own garden, turned against us." She expressed sympathy, then steered the conversation deftly. "Your greenhouse is remarkable, Sir Ambrose. Might I see it? I've a small herb patch myself. Nothing like yours, of course." He brightened, eager to escape scrutiny. "Of course! A fellow enthusiast. Come, let me show you." They crossed the damp lawn to the glass structure, its panes misted with condensation. Inside, a riot of green greeted them. Basil, mint, rosemary, and the tall bell-shaped foxglove. Its purple blooms swaying slightly. "All labelled," he said proudly, pointing to neat tags. "Sage here, Salvia officinalis, foxglove there, digitalis purpurea. No chance of confusion." Miss Marple peered at the labels, her fingers brushing the sage's soft leaves. "So orderly. You must spend hours here, indeed. Geoffrey helps now and then. Good lad, but no botanist. He clipped the sage yesterday, under my supervision." His tone was casual, but Miss Marple caught the emphasis on supervision. As they returned to the house, she glimpsed Geoffrey in the garden, raking leaves with unnecessary force. His eyes met hers, and he looked away, guilt written in his posture. She made a mental note to corner him later. Back in her cottage, Miss Marple sat with a fresh pot of tea, her thoughts spiralling. The greenhouse ruled out accidental mixing. Sir Ambrose's control was absolute. The poison had been introduced later, likely during preparation or serving. Dolly's survival suggested a calculated dose, not a random taint. Mrs. Pritchard's death removed a barrier to Sylvia's fortune, and to Sir Ambrose's influence over both wards. Yet Geoffrey's unease hinted at complicity, or at least knowledge. She recalled a village scandal years prior, where a greedy uncle tampered with a will to secure his niece's estate. The motive here felt similar: control over wealth, disguised as care. But the child's illness nagged at her. A deliberate act risked exposure, unless it was meant to deflect suspicion, a tragic accident to mask murder. As evening fell, Miss Marple lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome. The threads were there: greed, love, ambition, but the pattern remained elusive. She would watch, listen, and wait. In St. Mary Mead, secrets never stayed buried long. Chapter 4. Whispers in the Village, the drizzle that had cloaked Saint. Mary Mead, in the wake of Mrs. Pritchard's death, gave way by mid-morning to a feeble sun that did little to lift the village's spirits. The lanes, slick with mud, bore the hurried tracks of boots and bicycle tires, evidence of a community restless with speculation. At the heart of it all, Clodderham Court stood like a brooding sentinel, its gates now guarded by a solitary constable, whose bored expression belied the gravity of the investigation within. The air thrummed with whispers of poison, betrayal, and hidden fortunes, each tale more elaborate than the last, as if the village itself was spinning a yarn to rival the darkest penny dreadfuls. Miss Jane Marple, ensconced in her cottage with a pot of Earl Grey, found the gossip both a resource and a distraction. Her morning had begun with a visit from her neighbour, Mrs. Price, who delivered a loaf of soda bread and a torrent of theories. "It's that Sir Ambrose, mark my words," she declared, her hands flour-dusted from baking. "Those queer plants of his always knew they'd be trouble." And young Geoffrey, skulking about like a cat in a storm. "He's in love with Miss Sylvia, isn't he?" Mrs. Pritchard was a wall between them, and now she's gone. Miss Marple had nodded politely, her knitting needles pausing only briefly. Gossip, she knew, was like a river, muddy but revealing, if one sifted carefully. Her thoughts returned to the dinner at Clodderham Court, the gleam of candlelight on silver, the bitter tang of the stuffing, Sir Ambrose's deliberate serving. Dolly's survival gnawed at her, a child's small portion, laced with just enough poison to sicken but not kill, suggested a calculated hand. Mrs. Pritchard's death, by contrast, was brutally efficient, her plate heaped with the fatal herbs. The greenhouse, with its pristine labels, ruled out accident. Someone had orchestrated this with chilling precision, and Miss Marple's mind circled the players. Sir Ambrose, with his control over two fortunes. Geoffrey, caught between love and loyalty. Sylvia, a pawn in a game of wealth and power. Determined to unravel the threads, she donned her tweed coat and set out, her umbrella a precaution against the capricious sky. Her first destination was the village shop, a hub of chatter where Mrs. Wimpole, the postmistress, presided like a queen over her court of gossips. The bell above the door jangled as Miss Marple entered, her presence barely noticed amid the hum of voices. Mrs. Wimpole, sorting letters behind the counter, was in full flow. "I said to Mrs. Huggins, the cook up at the court, 'You mark my words, it's no mistake. Someone wanted that woman dead.' And she agreed. Said Sir Ambrose brought those herbs in himself, chopped and ready. Never let anyone else near them." A chorus of murmurs followed, with Mrs. Bantry, wife of the local squire, adding fuel. "That Geoffrey Denman's got motive, hasn't he?" Mrs. Pritchard was dead set against him marrying Sylvia. And with her out of the way, he's free to court her, and her money. The others nodded, their eyes gleaming with the thrill of scandal. Miss Marple, selecting a tin of biscuits, listened without comment. The village's fixation on Geoffrey was understandable but simplistic. Poison required not just motive, but opportunity, and the boy's nervous demeanour suggested guilt of a different sort, perhaps knowledge, not action. She paid for her purchase and slipped out, her mind turning to the greenhouse. If the herbs were Sir Ambrose's domain, how had foxglove found its way into the stuffing? Her next stop was the churchyard, where she found Mr. Petherick tending to a rose bush near the vestry. The vicar, his sleeves rolled up despite the chill, greeted her with a weary smile. "Miss Marple, you're a sight for sore eyes. This business, it's cast a shadow over us all. Dolly's mending, thank heaven, but the parish is in an uproar." She expressed relief for Dolly, then steered the conversation deftly. "The dinner was so pleasant until— Tell me, Mr. Petherick, did you notice anything odd before the tragedy? About the guests, perhaps?" He paused, his trowel hovering. "Well, now you mention it, there was a moment in the drawing-room. Sir Ambrose and Mrs. Pritchard were talking by the fire, quietly but tense. I caught a bit about Sylvia's trust. Mrs. Pritchard said something about irregularities and needing to consult the lawyers. Sir Ambrose brushed it off, all charm, but he looked rattled. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed behind her spectacles. Irregularities? That's most interesting. And Sylvia? How did she seem? Subdued, as always, under Mrs. Pritchard's eye. But she lit up when Geoffrey spoke to her. Young love, you know. I'd hoped they'd find happiness, but Mrs. Pritchard was adamant. No marriage until Sylvia's 21, and only then with her approval. This was new. An audit of Sir Ambrose's stewardship could threaten his control over both Sylvia's and Geoffrey's fortunes. Miss Marple thanked the vicar and moved on, her steps leading her toward the village green, where she hoped to find Sylvia. The girl, she sensed, held pieces of the puzzle, even if she didn't know it. Sylvia was there, sitting on a bench under an ancient yew, her sketchbook open but untouched. Her face, framed by a scarf, was pale, her eyes red from crying. "Miss Marple," she said, rising, "I'm so glad to see you." "I can't stop thinking about it. Mrs. Pritchard, Dolly, the horror of it all." Miss Marple sat beside her, her voice gentle. "A terrible shock, my dear. You must feel unmoored, losing your guardian so suddenly." Sylvia nodded, twisting a ring on her finger, a simple band likely a keepsake from her parents. She was strict, always watching me. My letters, my spending, she said it was to protect my inheritance, but it felt like a cage. Sir Ambrose was different. He encouraged me, talked of my future with Geoffrey. Now, though, I don't know what to think. Geoffrey's so distant, like he's hiding something. Miss Marple's ears pricked. Hiding? In what way? He won't talk about the dinner. When I asked if he saw anything odd, he just mumbled about the herbs and changed the subject. I know he helped Sir Ambrose pick them, but he'd never— could he? Her voice faltered, torn between loyalty and doubt. Miss Marple patted her hand. Grief and shock can make anyone withdraw, my dear. Give him time. But her mind was elsewhere. Geoffrey's reticence suggested he knew more than he let on. Perhaps not the act itself, but a detail that weighed on him. She recalled a village girl years ago, silent after a theft because she'd seen her brother near the scene. Guilt by association was a heavy burden. Bidding Sylvia farewell, Miss Marple made her way to Dr. Lloyd's surgery, hoping to probe further. The doctor, sorting papers at his desk, welcomed her with a tired nod. "Miss Marple, you're a regular visitor these days." "Still turning this over in your mind?" "Always, Doctor." "Child survival puzzles me. Why was Dolly spared when Mrs. Pritchard succumbed so quickly?" He leaned back, his brow furrowed. "It's the dosage. Dolly had a mere taste. Enough to sicken, not kill. Mrs. Pritchard's portion was laden with digitalis. The lab confirmed it. The poison wasn't uniform across the stuffing. My plate, the vicar's, clean. Sir Ambrose and Geoffrey barely touched theirs. It's as if the foxglove was added to specific servings." Miss Marple's eyes narrowed. "And the kitchen staff? Could they have tampered with it? I spoke to Mrs. Huggins again this morning. She's adamant. Sir Ambrose delivered the herbs himself, already chopped. The kitchen only mixed them into the stuffing per his instructions. No one else had access." This tightened the circle. The poison had been introduced after the herbs left the greenhouse, during preparation or serving. Sir Ambrose's role as host gave him ample opportunity to tamper during the meal, his jovial insistence masking darker intent. But Dolly's illness complicated things. A deliberate poisoner would avoid harming a child unless it served a purpose. To feign accident, perhaps, diverting suspicion. As she left the surgery, Miss Marple spotted Geoffrey crossing the village square, his shoulders hunched against the wind. She quickened her pace, catching him near the blacksmith's. "Geoffrey, a word if I may," he started, his face pale under a cap. "Miss Marple? I'm in a hurry. Just a moment," she said, her tone firm yet kind. "You helped Sir Ambrose with the herbs, I understand. Did anything strike you as unusual that day?" His eyes darted away, fixing on a passing cart. "No, nothing. We picked sage, like always. Uncle's particular about his plants. I just followed orders." His voice was tight, and he shifted his weight, eager to escape. Miss Marple pressed gently. "You seem troubled, my dear. If you saw something, even a small thing, it might help." He hesitated, then blurted, "It was all normal." I cut the sage. He checked it. But, later, in the kitchen, he was alone with the herbs for a bit. I didn't think anything of it then. He stopped as if regretting his words and hurried off, leaving Miss Marple with a new thread to tug. She made her way to Clodrum Court, her pretext a concern for Sir Ambrose's well-being. The butler admitted her, and she found the baronet in his study, surrounded by ledgers and a decanter of brandy. His face, usually florid, was drawn, his moustache drooping. "Miss Marple, you're kind to call. This affair, it's a nightmare. My reputation, my garden, all tainted." She murmured sympathy, then turned the conversation to his greenhouse. "I've been thinking of your herbs, Sir Ambrose." So meticulously kept. How could Foxglove have slipped in? He sighed, rubbing his temples. "A lapse, perhaps. I've been distracted. Estate matters, you know. Geoffrey helped, but he's no expert. I should have double-checked." His tone was weary, but his eyes held a guarded sharpness that Miss Marple noted. "Geoffrey mentioned you handled the herbs alone in the kitchen," she said casually, watching his reaction. He stiffened, then forced a laugh. "Did he?" The boys rattled, seeing shadows. "I merely seasoned the mix, my usual flair. No harm intended." But his hand trembled slightly as he reached for his glass. Miss Marple excused herself, declining tea, and stepped into the garden. There she found the gardener, old Mr. Bates, weeding a border. "A terrible thing, miss," he said, tipping his cap. "Sir Ambrose's plants are his pride. Never seen him mix up sage and foxglove, labels clear as day." "Never?" she pressed. "Not even in haste?" Bates shook his head. "He's sharp, miss. Knows every leaf. If foxglove got in, it wasn't by mistake." This confirmed her suspicions. The poison was no error, but a deliberate act, likely in the kitchen or at table. Sir Ambrose's control over the herbs, his opportunity to tamper, pointed to him. Yet Geoffrey's unease suggested he'd seen something. Perhaps his uncle's sleight of hand. Too late to stop it. Returning home, Miss Marple lit a fire and resumed her knitting, the needles clicking like a metronome. The pattern was emerging. Sir Ambrose, facing financial strain, needed to secure Sylvia's and Geoffrey's fortunes. Mrs. Pritchard's threat of an audit endangered his stewardship. Her death removed the obstacle, and Dolly's illness lent the appearance of accident. But Geoffrey's silence, was it loyalty, fear, or something deeper? She recalled a village case years prior, where a landlady poisoned a tenant to hide embezzled rents. The motive here was similar. Greed masked as guardianship. Yet the child's survival nagged at her. A careful poisoner would avoid such risks, unless the goal was to muddy the waters. As dusk settled, Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind alight with possibilities. The village whispered, but she listened for the truth beneath. A truth that, like her knitting, would unravel with the right tug. Chapter 5. Tangled Threads. The days following the tragedy at Clotterham Court draped St. Mary Mead in a quiet unease, as if the village itself held its breath, waiting for the next revelation. The sun, breaking through the persistent clouds, cast long shadows across the cobbled lanes, where villagers exchanged hushed theories over garden gates and market stalls. The spectre of poison lingered, a dark stain on the community's pastoral calm, and Miss Jane Marple, ever watchful, felt the weight of unseen truths pressing closer. Her cottage, with its familiar comforts of chintz curtains and crackling fire, became a sanctuary for thought. Her knitting needles clicking like a metronome, as she pieced together the fragments of a crime that was anything but accidental. The facts as she saw them were stark, yet elusive. Mrs. Pritchard's death by digitalis, delivered through the stuffing at Sir Ambrose's table, was no mishap. The greenhouse's meticulous labels ensured that. Dolly's survival, with her trace dose, suggested a calculated act. The child's illness, a cruel flourish to mask intent as error. Sir Ambrose, with his control over the herbs and the serving, stood at the centre of suspicion. His geniality, a veneer over motives rooted in greed or power. Yet Geoffrey's reticence, his fleeting admission of his uncle's time alone with the herbs, hinted at a secondary role, perhaps unwitting, perhaps coerced. Sylvia, freed from her guardian's iron grip, remained a figure of sympathy, her innocence clouded by the fortunes at stake. Miss Marple knew the truth lay in the interplay of these lives, like threads knotted in a pattern only patience could unravel. Her morning began with a letter from Sylvia, delivered by a breathless errand boy. The note, penned in a trembling hand, requested a visit at Clotterham Court. "I need your counsel, Miss Marple," it read. "Everything feels so uncertain now." Intrigued, Miss Marple tucked the letter into her pocket and set out, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path. The village was alive with activity. The baker's cart rattled by, children chased hoops near the green, and Mrs. Wimpole's voice carried from the post office, still spinning tales of Geoffrey's guilt. Miss Marple smiled faintly. The village's eagerness to pin the crime on young love was predictable, but she suspected a deeper game. Clodderham Court, though still grand, seemed diminished under the grey light, its ivy-clad walls heavy with the weight of scandal. The constable at the gate had been replaced by a gardener's boy, who nodded her through with a wary glance. Sylvia met her in the drawing-room, where the tiger-skin rug and Indian relics felt like relics of a happier era. The girl's lavender dress was replaced by sombre grey, her eyes red-rimmed but resolute. "Miss Marple, thank you for coming," she said, her voice low. "I feel so lost. Mrs. Pritchard's death, it's changed everything. Sir Ambrose says he'll manage my affairs now, but Geoffrey, he's pulling away, and I don't know why." Miss Marple settled into a velvet chair, her gaze gentle but probing. "Grief can make people retreat, my dear, but tell me, how has Sir Ambrose been toward you?" Sylvia twisted her handkerchief, a gesture Miss Marple recognized as nerves seeking outlet. "He's kind, too kind almost. He talks of my future, of marrying Geoffrey, as if it's settled. But Mrs. Pritchard always said I must wait, that my fortune needed protecting. Now she's gone, and Sir Ambrose is so eager to step in, it's unsettling." Miss Marple nodded, her mind turning to the vicar's mention of an audit. Mrs. Pritchard's threat to scrutinize Sir Ambrose's stewardship could have been a spark, enough to ignite a desperate act. "And Geoffrey," she prompted, "you mentioned he's distant." Sylvia's lips trembled. "He barely speaks to me." "Yesterday, I found him in the garden, staring at the greenhouse. When I asked what was wrong, he said, 'It's all my fault,' and walked away. I know he helped with the herbs, but he couldn't have meant harm, could he?" The question hung like a cobweb, delicate yet sticky. Miss Marple recalled a village lad years ago, tormented by guilt after witnessing his father's theft. Geoffrey's behaviour suggested he carried a burden, perhaps knowledge of his uncle's actions too heavy to voice. "Give him time, my dear," she said, patting Sylvia's hand. "Sometimes silence hides fear, not guilt." As Sylvia led her out, Miss Marple caught sight of Sir Ambrose crossing the hall, his step brisk despite the strain in his face. He greeted her with forced cheer. "Miss Marple! Always a pleasure. Staying for tea?" His moustache twitched, but his eyes held a guarded edge, as if measuring her intent. She declined politely, citing a prior engagement, but lingered long enough to ask, "How are you bearing up, Sir Ambrose? The greenhouse must feel like a betrayal, after all your care." He stiffened, then sighed. "A cruel twist indeed. I've prided myself on precision, but perhaps age is catching up. I've sent for a botanist friend to review my methods. Can't be too careful now." His tone was earnest, but Miss Marple noted the deflection, the swift shift from blame to precaution. Leaving the court, she took a detour through the village, her steps leading to the blacksmith's forge, where she'd last seen Geoffrey. The forge was quiet, the smith away, but she found the young man nearby, sitting on a low wall, his cap pulled low. His hands were clasped tightly, his knuckles white. "Geoffrey," she called softly, approaching with the air of a kindly aunt. Might we talk?" He looked up, startled, his eyes shadowed with fatigue. "Miss Marple, I'm not much for talking now." "Just a moment," she said, settling beside him. "You're troubled, I can see that. You mentioned Sir Ambrose was alone with the herbs in the kitchen. Did you see anything else that day? Anything that worries you?" He shifted, his gaze fixed on the ground. "I told you, it was normal. I cut the sage. He checked it. Later, he took the basket to the kitchen. I didn't follow. I should have, maybe?" His voice cracked, and he buried his face in his hands. "If I'd stayed, maybe she'd be alive." Miss Marple's heart softened, but her mind remained sharp. "You can't carry that weight, my dear. But if you saw something, however small, it might help the truth come out." He hesitated, then whispered, "He was humming. In the kitchen after I left. It's odd, now I think of it. He's never hummed before. Always so serious about his herbs. And the basket? It was covered with a cloth when he brought it. Aft or back, I didn't think to look underneath." He stood abruptly, muttering an excuse, and fled towards the court. Miss Marple watched him go, her thoughts racing. The humming, the covered basket, small details, but telling. Sir Ambrose's control over the herbs extended beyond the greenhouse, into the kitchen, where no eyes watched. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a housekeeper slipped laudanum into a guest's wine, her cheerful demeanour masking malice. Sir Ambrose's joviality at dinner, his insistence on serving Mrs. Pritchard, now seemed less benign. Her next stop was the police station, a squat building by the village hall, where Inspector Slack was sorting reports with his usual impatience. He greeted her with a grudging nod. "Miss Marple, come to meddle again?" "We're making progress. Lab confirms foxglove in the stuffing, concentrated in Mrs. Pritchard's portion. The child's was minimal, likely a residue. We're looking at the kitchen staff, but they're clean so far." She smiled serenely, undeterred by his tone. "Have you considered the serving, Inspector?" Sir Ambrose was most particular about who received what Slack's eyes narrowed. "He's the host. Naturally, he served." "You suggesting he tampered right at the table?" "Not suggesting, merely observing," she replied. "The herbs came from his hands, and he alone handled them after picking. A clever man might use his role to obscure intent." The inspector snorted, but jotted a note. "We'll look into it." "Got enough on our plate without old ladies spinning theories." Miss Marple left, without offence, knowing his bluster masked a grudging respect. The police would follow their path, but she would follow hers, guided by the subtleties of human nature. Her final call was to Mrs. Huggins, the cook, who lived in a tidy cottage near the court. The woman, stout and red-faced, welcomed her with a nervous flutter. "Oh, Miss Marple, it's been dreadful." "The police, the questions, I've never seen such a thing in my years at the court." Miss Marple accepted a cup of strong tea, her eyes taking in the kitchen's neat order. "You prepared the stuffing, I understand. Did anything strike you as unusual about the herbs Sir Ambrose brought?" Mrs. Huggins shook her head vehemently. "Not a bit. He brought a basket of sage, chopped fine, like always. Said he'd done it himself, didn't trust anyone else with his precious plants. I mixed it with the breadcrumbs and onions, per his recipe. Never saw a thing wrong till, well, you know." Her voice dropped and she crossed herself. "Was he alone with the herbs at any point?" Miss Marple asked, her tone casual. The cook frowned, thinking. Come to mention it, yes. He stayed in the kitchen after I took the quail to roast. Said he wanted to check the seasoning. I was busy with the vegetables, didn't pay mind. He was only there a minute or two. A minute or two, enough time for a new, practiced hand to add a fatal ingredient. Miss Marple thanked her and left, the pieces falling into place. Sir Ambrose's opportunity was clear. The greenhouse, the kitchen, the table, all under his command. Dolly's illness, she suspected, was a calculated risk, a trace of poison to suggest contamination rather than murder. But Geoffrey's knowledge complicated things. Had he seen the switch, or merely suspected it after the fact? Back in her cottage, Miss Marple lit a lamp as dusk deepened, the fire casting shadows that danced like the doubts in her mind. She resumed her knitting, the rhythm soothing her thoughts. The motive was becoming clearer. Sir Ambrose's finances, strained by years of lavish living, depended on his ward's trusts. Mrs. Pritchard's threat of an audit jeopardized fear, perhaps desperation. Her death secured his control, and a marriage between Geoffrey and Sylvia would cement it further. Yet Geoffrey's silence, his guilt, his fear, suggested he was a pawn, not a player. She recalled a village scandal from her youth, where a solicitor poisoned a client to hide embezzled funds. The parallel was striking. A trusted figure, a hidden crime, a facade of respectability. But the child's survival was the anomaly. A careful poisoner would avoid such a risk unless it served to blur the truth, making the act seem haphazard. As she knitted, a new thought emerged. The police had found foxglove leaves in the kitchen bin, discarded after the meal. Why discard them, unless to erase evidence of tampering? Sir Ambrose's claim of a mistake was flimsy. His expertise made accidental substitution implausible. The leaves, she suspected, were a plant, pun intended, to bolster his defence. A knock at the door startled her. It was Doctor Lloyd, his face grim. "Miss Marple, I've just come from the court." The police found something. A vial in the greenhouse, tucked behind the foxglove. Traces of digitalis extract, not just leaves. It's no garden mix-up now. She nodded, her suspicions confirmed. Extract suggests intent, Doctor. A concentrated dose, easier to slip into a single portion. He agreed, his voice low. Slack's leaning towards Sir Ambrose now, but Geoffrey's still under scrutiny. The boy's a wreck, keeps muttering about failing Sylvia. Miss Marple thanked him, her mind racing. The vial was a bold move, too obvious for a man like Sir Ambrose, unless he meant it to be found, shifting blame to an unseen accomplice. She recalled a case where a murderer planted evidence to mislead, only to be caught by an overlooked detail. Here, the detail was Dolly, her survival a clue to the poison's precision. As night fell, Miss Marple sat by her fire, the knitting needles steady. The pattern was clearer now. Greed, masked by guardianship, fueled by desperation. Sir Ambrose's hand had wielded the poison, but Geoffrey's silence held the key. She would need to confront him again, gently but firmly, to unravel the final thread. In St. Mary Mead, truth was like a garden weed, persistent, waiting for the right hand to pluck it. Chapter 6. The Unravelling, the Twilight that Settled over St. Mary Mead carried a chill that seemed to seep into the very bones of the village, as if the secrets buried in its quiet lanes were rising to meet the fading light. Clodderham Court, once a beacon of grandeur, now loomed like a mausoleum, its windows reflecting the last glimmers of a sun that offered no warmth. The village buzzed with a nervous energy, its inhabitants caught between fear and fascination, their whispers weaving a tapestry of suspicion that grew darker with each passing hour. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her parlour with a shawl draped over her shoulders, felt the weight of the case pressing closer, like a storm gathering on the horizon. Her knitting lay untouched, the needles silent for once, as her mind sifted through the threads of evidence, each one leading inexorably to a truth she could no longer ignore. The pieces were falling into place with a clarity that both satisfied and saddened her. Sir Ambrose Percy, with his jovial facade and iron grip on the fortunes of his wards, stood at the heart of the crime. The foxglove, the vial of digitalis extract, the deliberate serving of the poisoned stuffing, all pointed to a man driven by desperation to protect his dwindling wealth. Mrs. Pritchard's death had removed a formidable obstacle, her threats of an audit silenced forever. Dolly's illness, a calculated misstep, served to muddy the waters, suggesting accident where intent reigned supreme. Yet Geoffrey's silence, his haunted eyes and cryptic admissions, remains the final knot in the pattern. Was he a witness, a reluctant accomplice, or merely a young man crushed by the weight of suspicion? Miss Marple knew the answer lay in drawing him out, but first she needed to lay her case before those who could act. The opportunity came with an unexpected summons from Inspector Slack, delivered by a young constable who arrived at her cottage as the evening deepened. "The inspector's at the court, miss," he said, shifting nervously. "Wants everyone there. Says he's close to cracking the case, but he'd like your observations." The hesitation in his voice suggested Slack's request was less an invitation than a grudging acknowledgement of her insight. Miss Marple, never one to underestimate the power of being underestimated, agreed at once, gathering her coat and a notebook she kept for such occasions. Clodderham Court was ablaze with light when she arrived, the drawing-room transformed into a stage for confrontation. The same cast from that fateful dinner assembled, their faces etched with varying degrees of dread and defiance. Sir Ambrose sat by the fire, his hands folded over his paunch, his moustache drooping, but his eyes sharp as ever. Sylvia, pale and fragile in a black dress, clung to the arm of a settee, her gaze flickering toward Geoffrey, who stood by the window, his shoulders hunched as if bracing for a blow. Dr. Lloyd, his medical bag at his side, exuded a quiet authority, while the vicar, Mr. Petherick, clutched a prayer book, his niece Dolly, absent but recovering at the vicarage. Inspector Slack dominated the centre, his notebook open, his manner bristling with purpose. "Thank you all for coming," Slack began, his voice cutting through the room's tension like a knife. "We're here to settle this business once and for all. The labs confirmed it. Digitalis extract, not just leaves, in Mrs. Pritchard's stuffing. A concentrated dose, lethal in minutes. The child's portion had traces, enough to sicken, not kill. This was no accident. Someone in this room knew exactly what they were doing." A murmur rippled through the group, Sylvia's hand tightening on her handkerchief, Geoffrey's jaw clenching. Sir Ambrose cleared his throat, his tone indignant. "Inspector, this is outrageous. My herbs, my home tainted by this tragedy. I've cooperated fully, shown you my greenhouse. A mistake, surely." Miss Marple, seated unobtrusively near the door, spoke up, her voice soft but carrying the weight of conviction. "If I may, Inspector, a mistake seems unlikely." Your greenhouse, Sir Ambrose, is a model of precision. Sage and foxglove, clearly labelled worlds apart. The vial of extract found hidden behind the foxglove suggests preparation, not carelessness. Slack's eyes narrowed, but he nodded, sensing her direction. Go on, Miss Marple. You got something to say, I reckon. She rose, her small figure commanding the room in a way that belied her unassuming appearance. The facts, as I see them, point to a deliberate act. Mrs. Pritchard's death was no random misfortune. Her portion of stuffing was laced with a lethal dose of digitalis, while Dolly's held just enough to cause distress, lending the appearance of a broader contamination. The rest of us, Doctor, Lloyd, Mr. Petherick, myself, ate safely. Geoffrey and Sir Ambrose barely touched their servings, a curious detail in itself. Geoffrey flinched, his eyes darting to his uncle. Sylvia gasped softly, her hand covering her mouth. Sir Ambrose's face reddened, but he remained silent, his fingers gripping the arms of his chair. Miss Marple continued, her tone measured, like a teacher unravelling a complex lesson. The herbs came from the greenhouse, under Sir Ambrose's control. He alone handled them in the kitchen, as Mrs. Huggins confirmed. He served the meal, insisting on generous helpings for Mrs. Pritchard. The vial of extract conveniently found suggests a plan to point suspicion elsewhere, perhaps to a servant or an unseen intruder. But the truth lies in motive. Slack leaned forward, his impatience giving way to curiosity. Motive! We've been looking at the boy. Geoffrey's got reason, with Mrs. Pritchard blocking his marriage to Miss Keene. Miss Marple shook, her head, her eyes kind but firm. Geoffrey's love for Sylvia is real, but poison is not the tool of youth in passion. It requires patience, precision, a colder mind. Mrs. Pritchard, as Sylvia's guardian, controlled her fortune and opposed her marriage. She also threatened an audit of Sir Ambrose's stewardship, a danger to his authority over both Sylvia's and Geoffrey's trusts. Her death removed that threat, paving the way for Sir Ambrose to consolidate control, perhaps through a marriage he could orchestrate. Sir Ambrose leapt to his feet, his voice booming. This is preposterous. I've cared for those children as my own. An audit? Nonsense. She was a meddling woman, but I'd never— Sir Ambrose, Miss Marple interrupted gently. Your greenhouse is your domain, your herbs, your tools. The digitalis extract was no accident. You were alone in the kitchen, as Geoffrey noted. You hummed, a small thing, but out of character for a man so meticulous. You covered the basket, hiding your work. And at dinner, you pressed extra stuffing on Mrs. Pritchard, ensuring her fate. Geoffrey's head snapped up, his voice breaking. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I saw him in the kitchen, yes, but I thought he was just seasoning. When I heard about the foxglove, I suspected, but I couldn't believe it. Tears welled in his eyes, and Sylvia reached for his hand, her face a mix of shock and pity. Dr. Lloyd spoke up, his voice steady. The dosage confirms it. The extract was precise, lethal for an adult, minimal for a child. Dolly's illness was a miscalculation, meant to suggest a tainted batch. Only someone with access and knowledge could manage that. Sir Ambrose's bluster faltered, his face crumpling like paper. You can't prove this. The vial, anyone could have placed it. A servant, a trespasser. Miss Marple's voice cut through, calm but relentless. The vial was too convenient, Sir Ambrose. A clever man might plant it to deflect blame, but it only underscores your access to the poison. And Dolly's testimony. She saw you urge Mrs. Pritchard to take more, your voice insistent. The police found no trace of foxglove in the kitchen until after the meal, when leaves appeared in the bin. A clumsy attempt to stage an error. Slack, now fully engaged, stepped forward. We've got the lab reports, Bertie. The extract matches traces in the stuffing. Your prints were on the vial, and the cook's statement. You were alone with the herbs. Care to explain? Sir Ambrose sank back into his chair, his defiance draining away. His voice was a whisper, hoarse with defeat. She was going to ruin me. The audit. She'd found discrepancies, small ones, but enough to question my management. I'd borrowed from the trusts, temporary, to cover debts. She threatened to take the wards away, to expose me. I couldn't let her destroy everything. Sylvia gasped, her hand dropping from Geoffrey's. You killed her? For money? He looked at her, his eyes hollow. For you, Sylvia? For both of you. A marriage would secure your futures, keep the estate intact. I thought, a small act, a moment's work, and it would all be safe. Miss Marple's heart ached for the young lovers, caught in a web spun by greed. She turned to Slack. Inspector, I believe you have your confession. The motive was clear. Control over the trusts, threatened by Mrs. Pritchard's vigilance. The method was cunning, but the child's survival betrayed the plan. Slack nodded, motioning to the constable. Sir Ambrose Bertie, you're under arrest for the murder of Eleanor Pritchard. As the handcuffs clicked, the room fell silent, the weight of truth settling like dust. Geoffrey, trembling, turned to Sylvia. I should have spoken sooner. I saw him linger in the kitchen, but I didn't want to believe it. I'm sorry. She took his hand again, her voice soft. You didn't know, Geoffrey. You couldn't have Miss Marple watched them. Her mind drifting to a long-ago case in the village where a confession had freed a family from suspicion. The truth, however painful, brought clarity. She slipped out quietly, leaving Slack to his paperwork and the young couple to their healing. Back in her cottage, she lit a fire and resumed her knitting, the needles clicking once more. The pattern was complete, the threads untangled. Sir Ambrose's greed had woven a deadly web, but a child's sharp eyes and a spinster's quiet persistence had unravelled it. St. Mary Mead would recover, as it always did, but Miss Marple knew the shadows of human nature would linger, waiting for her to illuminate them again. Chapter 7. Quiet Resolution. The aftermath of Sir Ambrose Bertie's arrest settled over St. Mary Mead like a soft mist, diffusing the sharp edges of fear and suspicion that had gripped the village for days. The sun returned in earnest, gilding the thatched roofs and hedgerows with a warmth that felt like a promise of renewal. Clodderham Court, though still imposing, seemed to exhale, its windows catching the light as if eager to shed the shadow of its master's disgrace. The village, ever resilient, began to weave the tragedy into its lore, the tale of poisoned herbs and a spinster's keen insight destined to be retold over tea and at the annual fete. Yet for Miss Jane Marple, seated once more in her cosy parlour, the resolution brought a bittersweet satisfaction, tempered by the knowledge that human frailty, like a persistent weed, would always find new soil to take root. Her knitting had resumed its familiar rhythm, the needles clicking softly as she worked a pale blue shawl, its delicate pattern a contrast to the tangled web she had unravelled. The fire crackled in the grate, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. and a pot of chamomile tea steamed gently on the table. Outside, the village moved on. The baker's cart rattled past, children laughed in the lane, and the church bells tolled for evensong, their notes a reminder of life's continuity. Yet Miss Marple's mind lingered on the events at Clodderham Court, piecing together the final threads of a drama that had unfolded with the precision of a Greek tragedy. Sir Ambrose's confession, wrung from him in the drawing-room's charged atmosphere, had closed the case for Inspector Slack, whose brusque efficiency now turned to paperwork and reports for the county magistrate. The baronet, once a pillar of colonial authority, was now a broken figure. His dreams of wealth and control shattered by his own hand. The vial of digitalis extract, the carefully dosed stuffing, the discarded foxglove leaves, all were damning evidence, corroborated by the cook's testimony and Dolly's innocent observations. Yet it was Geoffrey's reluctant admission, spurred by Miss Marple's gentle probing, that had sealed the truth. Sir Ambrose's moment alone in the kitchen, his humming a mask for malice, had been the pivot on which the crime turned. Miss Marple's thoughts turned to the young lovers, Geoffrey and Sylvia, whose futures had been so perilously entwined with their guardian's schemes. Sylvia, freed from Mrs. Pritchard's iron grip, now faced the daunting prospect of managing her inheritance alone, while Geoffrey bore the weight of his unintended role in the tragedy. Their love, tested by suspicion, had endured, and Miss Marple had heard whispers of a quiet engagement, a promise of a simpler life away from the court's looming shadow. She smiled faintly, recalling a village romance from her youth, where love had triumphed over a similar scandal, though not without scars. Her reverie was interrupted by a knock at the door. Florence, her maid, ushered in Sylvia Keene, whose black mourning dress was softened by a sprig of white jasmine pinned at her collar, a nod perhaps to hope amid grief. The girl's face, though pale, held a new resolve, her eyes clear despite the shadows beneath them. "Miss Marple," she said, settling into a chair, "I had to come. You've done so much. Without you, we might never have known the truth." Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her expression warm but attentive. "My dear, I only listened and watched, as I always do. The truth has a way of surfacing, given time. How are you faring?" Sylvia's fingers traced the jasmine sprig, a nervous gesture. "Better, I think." It's strange, being free of Mrs. Pritchard. She was so strict, but I never wished her harm. And Sir Ambrose, I trusted him, thought him kind. To know he could do such a thing. Her voice faltered, and she looked down. "It's a hard lesson," Miss Marple said gently, "that those we trust can hide dark motives. But you're young, with a bright path ahead. And Geoffrey?" A faint smile touched Sylvia's lips. "He's himself again, mostly. He blames himself for not speaking sooner, but I've told him it wasn't his fault. We're planning a small wedding. Nothing grand, just the vicar and a few friends. We want to leave Clodderham Court, start fresh somewhere quiet." Miss Marple nodded, her heart warmed by their resilience. "A wise choice, my dear. The court holds too many memories now. A new beginning will suit you both." Sylvia hesitated, then leaned forward. "There's something else. I found a letter among Mrs. Pritchard's things, written to her solicitor, demanding an audit of Sir Ambrose's accounts. She suspected he'd been dipping into my trust and Geoffrey's too. It must have driven him to what he did." This confirmed Miss Marple's suspicions. The audit, a looming threat to Sir Ambrose's carefully curated empire, had been the spark that ignited his desperation. She recalled a village spinster years ago, whose discovery of a cousin's embezzlement led to a fatal quarrel. Greed, cloaked in respectability, was a familiar foe. "You've done well to find it," she said. "It will help the police and perhaps ease your mind." Sylvia rose, her gratitude evident. "Thank you, Miss Marple. You've given us a chance to move forward." As she left, her step was lighter, as if the weight of truth had lifted slightly. The afternoon brought another visitor. Dr. Lloyd, his medical bag slung over his shoulder, his face lined with the fatigue of a man who had seen too much suffering. "Miss Marple," he said, accepting a cup of tea, "you've outdone yourself." "Slack's singing your praises, quietly, mind you. Says you saw what he missed." She smiled, waving a hand. "Nonsense, Doctor. I only pointed out what was there. The child's survival was the key. Dolly's sharp eyes and your medical insight did the rest." He chuckled, stirring his tea. "You're too modest. The dosage was precise, as you said. Lethal for Mrs. Pritchard, just enough to sicken Dolly. Sir Ambrose knew his plants, no question. That vial of extract was his undoing. Too clever by half, planting it to suggest an outside hand." Miss Marple's eyes gleamed. "Indeed. A clever man overreaches, thinking to outwit us all. But human nature is predictable, Doctor. Greed betrays itself, like a dropped stitch in a pattern." They spoke for a time of village matters, the fete, the church roof fund, before Doctor. Lloyd took his leave, promising to check on Dolly. Miss Marple returned to her knitting, her thoughts drifting to the vicar and his niece. Dolly, now fully recovered, had been a linchpin in the case. Her innocent observation of Sir Ambrose's insistence on Mrs. Pritchard's portion, a crucial thread. Miss Marple resolved to send her a small gift, a book of fairy tales, perhaps, to brighten her days. As evening fell, she took a walk to the churchyard, where the air was sweet with the scent of late roses. Mr. Petherick was there, tending a grave with his usual care, his face serene despite the recent turmoil. "Miss Marple," he greeted, "you've brought peace to our little world. The parish owes you a debt." She shook her head, her scarf fluttering in the breeze. "I only followed the clues, mister. Petherick Dolly's courage and your kindness helped immensely. How is she?" "Bright as ever," he said, smiling. "She's been telling everyone how she helped catch a villain. I fear she'll grow up thinking detective work is her calling." Miss Marple laughed softly. "Perhaps it is. She has a sharp eye, like my old friend Mrs. Bantry's granddaughter. Children see what we overlook." They walked together to the vicarage, where Dolly greeted them with a gleeful shout, her ribbon askew from play. "Miss Marple, did you catch the bad man?" she asked, her eyes wide. "I had help, my dear," Miss Marple replied, patting her head. "Your memory of the dinner was very important." Dolly beamed, then ran off to chase a kitten, her laughter a balm to the village's wounds. Miss Marple declined tea, citing the hour, and made her way home, her steps slow but purposeful. The case was closed, yet her mind lingered on its lessons. Sir Ambrose's fall was a reminder that power, unchecked, could twist even the most respectable heart. She recalled a village grocer, years ago, who poisoned a rival's cider to secure a contract. The motives were different, but the pattern was the same. Greed, cloaked in duty, unravelling under scrutiny. Back in her parlour, She lit a lamp and resumed her knitting, the shawl nearly complete. The fire's glow cast patterns on the walls, and she thought of Geoffrey and Sylvia, their love a fragile thread now strengthened by truth. The village would heal, as it always did, its gossip turning to newer tales. But Miss Marple knew her role was unchanged. To watch, to listen, to untangle the knots of human nature when they tightened into crime. As she worked, a memory surfaced, a conversation with her nephew Raymond, who once teased her for seeing mysteries in every village squabble. "You're like a spider, Aunt Jane," he'd said, "spinning webs to catch secrets." She smiled at the thought, her needles clicking steadily. Spiders, she mused, were patient creatures, and so was she. In St. Mary Mead, secrets never stayed hidden long, and Miss Jane Marple would always be there, her quiet vigilance a beacon in the shadows.